The historical debate comparing the Viking and the samurai has captured the imagination of military enthusiasts for decades. The Viking represents raw power, forged in the freezing winds and stormy seas of Scandinavia. The samurai embodies refined precision, perfected through generations of strict discipline and martial arts training. On one side of the battlefield stands a giant who crossed vast oceans to raid, trade, and conquer new territories. On the other side stands a swift swordsman whose entire life belongs to the art of war and the defense of his lord. Popular culture has turned both of these historical figures into near-mythical legends of ultimate combat. Almost every debate online about this matchup ends in shouting matches and historical inaccuracy. Finding the real answer requires looking past the myths and analyzing the cold, hard facts of history. To understand who would actually win, we must first strip away the layers of cinematic exaggeration that distort our view. The geographic environments of these warriors shape their physical development, tactical thinking, and combat methods. Scandinavia was a harsh land characterized by deep fjords, cold oceans, rocky soil, and scarce agricultural resources. This environment forced the Norse people to become exceptionally hardy, turning to the sea for survival, trade, and plunder. In contrast, Japan was an isolated island nation characterized by rugged volcanic mountains and dense forests. This landscape fostered a military class dedicated to internal warfare, defending territories, and serving local feudal lords. Many people picture the Viking as a wild, disorganized barbarian who fights with no strategy or discipline. Historical records from the late 8th century to the 11th century paint a very different picture of Norse society. Scandinavian raiders were highly organized, using sophisticated tactics, navigation, and maritime technology to dominate Europe. Their physical size was indeed impressive, with average male heights reaching 172 centimeters, which made them taller than most of their European contemporaries. They were not mindless berserkers, but farmers, traders, and engineers who understood the value of teamwork and formation fighting. The famous horned helmet is a complete historical fabrication invented by 19th century Romantic artists. Instead, they wore practical iron helmets, leather armor, or heavy woolen tunics that offered mobility and basic protection. Their combat style was brutal, direct, and heavily reliant on collective strength rather than individual glory. The Viking warrior relied on a versatile arsenal of weapons designed for close combat. Their primary weapon was often the spear, which was cheap to produce and highly effective in both throwing and thrusting. The iconic bearded axe, or skeggox, allowed them to hook an enemy's shield, pulling it down to create an opening for a fatal blow. Wealthier warriors carried double-edged swords, such as the famous Ulfberht blades, which were made from high-carbon steel imported from Central Europe. These swords were balanced for both cutting and thrusting, allowing a warrior to adapt to changing combat conditions. For protection, the Viking relied heavily on a large round shield made of light linden wood, reinforced with an iron boss in the center. The popular image of the samurai is a lone warrior who fights exclusively with a katana, valuing personal honor above victory. In reality, their military history spans from the 10th century to the late 19th century. For most of their history, they were not duelists, but mounted archers who fought in disciplined armies. The katana was actually a secondary sidearm, used only when their primary weapons failed. Their primary combat tool was the Yumi, a massive asymmetrical bow that could launch heavy arrows from horseback. On the ground, they relied on long spears called yori and curved polearms called naginata to keep enemies at a distance. Their armor was not heavy, clunky metal, but a highly flexible system of lacquered iron plates bound together by silk cords. This design allowed them to move with incredible speed and agility while still protecting vital organs. The training of a samurai began in early childhood, focusing on archery, horsemanship, swordsmanship, and mental discipline. They lived by a strict code that demanded absolute loyalty to their lord, transforming them into professional military officers. Now let us look at how these two warriors would fare against each other in different combat scenarios. In the first round, we will examine an unarmored duel, where speed and weapon reach are the only factors. The Viking enters the circle carrying a heavy round shield made of light linden wood and a broad iron sword. The samurai wields a two-handed katana, balanced perfectly for quick, decisive slashing motions. Without armor, speed and reaction time become the primary factors in survival. The samurai holds a significant advantage in weapon speed, as the katana is designed for rapid drawing and cutting. A single clean strike from a katana can sever limbs and end the fight in a fraction of a second. The Viking, however, is not a slow target, having trained to dodge and deflect attacks from early childhood. The Viking round shield is a highly active weapon, used not just to block, but to bash, blind, and redirect the opponent's blade. If the Viking can absorb the samurai's initial strike on the wooden shield, the samurai's blade may become temporarily stuck. This split second allows the Viking to deliver a crushing counterattack with their heavy iron sword. Yet, the samurai's superior footwork and focus on sudden, explosive attacks make them lethal in a duel without protection. The samurai's training in kenjutsu emphasizes reading the opponent's movements and striking before they can react. In the second round, we dress both warriors in their full battle gear. The Viking wears a riveted chainmail hauberk, which is exceptionally good at stopping cuts, but offers less protection against blunt force. Underneath the mail, layers of thick wool or leather absorb the shock of incoming blows. The samurai wears classical lamellar armor, constructed from hundreds of small iron scales that absorb and deflect strikes. The Viking's iron sword would struggle to penetrate the samurai's lacquered plates. Similarly, the samurai's katana, designed for cutting soft targets, would chip or shatter against the Viking's steel chainmail. Both warriors would need to adapt their weapon choices for this armored encounter. The Viking would likely choose the devastating Dane axe, a two-handed weapon with a 2-meter shaft that can deliver force capable of breaking bones through mail and plates. The samurai would counter with the yari spear, utilizing precise thrusting motions to target the gaps in the Viking's armor. The samurai's helmet, or kabuto, features a heavy steel neck guard that protects against sweeping attacks from the side. The Viking's nasal helmet protects the face but leaves the jaw and neck exposed to precise thrusts. In a battle of attrition, the heavy impacts of the Dane axe could compromise the structural integrity of the samurai's armor. However, the samurai's agility and range with the spear provide a distinct advantage in keeping the axe-wielding giant at bay. The flexible construction of the samurai's lamellar armor allows them to maintain a lower center of gravity and dodge heavy swings. Now let us transition to the third round, which takes place on a chaotic battlefield. Individual combat rarely represents how these warriors actually fought in history. Vikings were masters of the shield wall, locking their wooden shields together to form an impenetrable barrier of oak and iron. Behind this wall, spears protruded to impale anyone foolish enough to charge. This formation was designed for infantry battles on flat coastlines or muddy fields. Samurai, by contrast, evolved as elite cavalry units operating on the rugged volcanic terrain of Japan. A troop of samurai would not charge directly into a shield wall. Instead, they would circle it at high speed. Using the Yumi bow, a group of mounted samurai could rain down heavy arrows from a distance of over 100 meters. The Viking shields would eventually splinter under the constant barrage of high-velocity archery. Once the shield wall began to fracture, the samurai would close the distance using their long yari spears to execute isolated survivors. If the battle occurred in dense forests or muddy swamps where horses could not maneuver, the advantage would swing back to the Vikings. In close-quarters infantry chaos, the Vikings' collective experience in shield-to-shield grinding matches would overwhelm the samurai's more individualistic style. The sheer physical mass of a Viking charging unit would shatter any infantry formation the samurai attempted to hold. For the fourth round, we place them in a one-on-one duel in a neutral environment. A duel between a single Viking and a single samurai is the ultimate test of their martial philosophies. The Viking fights with a pragmatic, aggressive style focused on survival and intimidation. The samurai approaches the duel with intense psychological preparation, looking to end the conflict in a single, perfect stroke. The samurai would seek to maintain a steady distance, using the length of a spear or a naginata to keep the Viking from closing in. The samurai uses long-range thrusts with the katana or spear to test the Viking's defense. The Viking uses their massive physical presence and shield-bashing techniques to force the samurai into a corner. If the samurai remains calm, they can exploit the opening created when the Viking swings a heavy weapon like the Dane axe. If the Viking manages to close the distance and initiate a grappling match, the samurai's physical size disadvantage becomes a critical liability. Historical wrestling techniques, known as gleamer for the Vikings and jujutsu for the samurai, show that both were highly skilled in ground combat. The Vikings' larger frame and experience in rough, unrefined wrestling would give them the upper hand in a wrestling match. The samurai, however, carries a small dagger called a tanto, specifically designed for stabbing between armor plates during close-range grappling. The psychological mindset of both warriors also plays a major role in a duel. The Viking believes that their death is preordained, which gives them a fearless, almost reckless bravery in combat. The samurai is trained to accept death as a constant companion, allowing them to remain calm under extreme pressure. Now we must introduce the unexpected twist that changes this entire debate. The outcome of this legendary matchup is not fixed because neither warrior remained static across time. A Viking from the 8th century wore simple equipment and fought differently than a Viking from the 11th century. An 11th century Viking, having fought in the armies of England and the Byzantine Empire, wore heavy Norman-style mail and used advanced siege tactics. A samurai from the Kamakura period of the 13th century relied almost entirely on the bow and arrow. A samurai from the Sengoku period of the 16th century wore bulletproof steel armor and carried matchlock muskets. If a 16th century samurai faced an 8th century Viking, the technological gap would make the fight incredibly one-sided. The introduction of gunpowder weapons in Japan during the year 1543 changed samurai warfare forever. A samurai armed with a matchlock musket could eliminate a Viking from a distance before any close combat could occur. Conversely, if an 11th century Viking faced an early Kamakura samurai, The Vikings' heavy iron armor and massive shields would offer excellent protection against arrows. The terrain also plays a decisive role in determining the victor. On the rocky, steep slopes of Japan, the samurai's specialized footwork and lightweight armor would give them complete dominance. On the wet, slippery deck of a longship or a muddy European riverbank, the Vikings' sea legs and massive shields would be unbeatable. Comparing these warriors requires examining the societal structures that created them. Vikings were free men, property owners, and seasonal raiders who fought for wealth, land, and prestige. Samurai were professional soldiers, bound by strict laws and a rigid social hierarchy that demanded absolute loyalty to their lord. The Viking fought for his family and his immediate companions in the shield wall. The samurai fought for the honor of his clan and the political ambitions of his daimyo. This difference in motivation influenced how they handled defeat and victory. A Viking would happily retreat if a raid became too costly, returning later with a larger force to finish the job. A samurai was often expected to fight to the death, as retreating could bring eternal shame to his family. This psychological difference made the Viking more adaptable and pragmatic, while the samurai was more determined and lethal. Choosing a protector between these two legendary warriors depends entirely on what kind of threat you face. If you need a guard to defend a narrow doorway against multiple attackers, the Vikings' massive shield and relentless aggression are unmatched. If you need a bodyguard to defend you against a sudden, stealthy assassin in the night, the samurai's lightning-fast reflexes and constant awareness are superior. Both represent the pinnacle of their respective military cultures. In the end, the winner of this hypothetical battle is not a single warrior, but the environment that dictates the rules of engagement.